So for today's live workshop, we'll be looking at something different than what we normally do. So we've done paintings, we've done Indian art, we've done cubism. Now let's try to explore another aspect of art. So today we'll be looking at Impressionism or Impressionism painting. Now, what exactly is Impressionism, you may ask? Is it something where you just leave an impression? Yes and no. So Impressionism painting was basically, it's an art movement which emerged around the 19th century, which was in France. Now it mainly focused on capturing right or momentary effects. The Impressionist painters, they often used very loose and very vibrant colors. They tried to depict, your everyday scenes, maybe landscapes, urban lives, and they tried to stay away from realism as much as possible. Now, if you've seen Cubism, a Cubism art workshop, over there they took aspects of reality and they broke it. But over here, they try to fade away from reality, whereas they capture a slight essence to it, or maybe just an impression, you could say. So now this movement, it had started with a few famous artists now, not then. So we have Claude Monet, we have Auguste Renoir, we have Edgar Degas. So this movement, it started off with a lot of criticism, but eventually it gained recognition and it influenced a lot of modern art as well. Now, why did it gain criticism, you may ask? Since they were since they did paintings that strayed away from reality or realism back then in the late 19th century, realism was at its peak. We had different exhibitions, different art schools, and they had so much power that certain art schools could control what goes into an exhibition and what doesn't. Now, at that time, Impressionism, they had a desire to break away from the formal constraints of academic art. Now, these group of artists, they often painted on plein air, or basically open air, which is something that they do on the spot. Now, the term Impressionism, it has come from a derogatory review of one of Monet's painting called Impression Sunrise. Now, today we will be painting exactly that. We'll be painting the Impression Sunrise for today's workshop. So let's start with our workshop. Now, before we start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape the borders. Since we're making a bookmark, we want the painting to, sort of pop out of it. We don't want to make something, very normal, very boring. We want to create some sort of character into it. Something that would leave a very good impression, you may say. So we can start off by taping the top border. So you can keep it at a very minimal. We don't want the borders to be too thick. I'll keep this there. Then we can do the bottom part. Just like that, make sure that the tape is properly sealed over the paper. So the tape I am currently using is called masking tape or paper tape. You can get it at your local stationery. So if you see, this tape, unlike sellotape, this is not made out of plastic. It's made entirely out of paper. So what this does is it helps absorb some of the paint that may fall onto the sides, and it is a lot easier to use. I'll take this, I'll measure exactly how much do I need. Okay, that looks good. And then I can tape this corner as well. I'll mark the bottom first, and then the top, and then place it down. Press it from the middle, and then tape it down. Now the same thing for the right side. Okay, that looks good. Press it down the middle, up and down, and then we'll solidify this. Now, the name of the painting, titled Impression Sunset, this was one of the first works that Monet had made to put up in the art galleries. But then the artists back then, they had embraced the label, forming an independent group which then held exhibitions of their own outside of the official salon. Salon being the art gallery or the art exhibitions of that time. So what had happened was that when these impressionist artists like Claude Monet or Renoir, when they put up their works for the initial exhibitions, when they gave it for reviewing, because you couldn't just simply put your painting over there just because you call yourself a painter. It needed to be approved by the board or the head of artists. So when they showed their works over there, they said that this is not art. This is not something that we would approve. And these impressionist painters, they did not agree with what they said. So what they did was they started their own salon or their own exhibition where all of these artists, they came together and they put up their works. Now in retrospect, if you go to see realism back then, don't get me wrong, it was very fascinating, it was very immersive. But what these impressionist painters, what they strived to paint was not something that we see in our everyday life. It was something that we could experience rather than something that we see. Now, say for example, you go to the beach, you see a beautiful sunset, you take a photo of it, but the feeling in that photo is not the same as what you have seen in person, right? So the whole point of this style, Impressionism, is to capture that impression or that feeling that you got when you were sitting there and looking at the ocean. Now, when they painted this, they tried to keep it as subtle as possible. They did not try to capture each and everything. You could say they tried to capture an after image of it, you could say. Something that is there and not there at the same time. Now over here, if you look at the reference that is there, this is the very same painting that got criticized of Monet. This one's called Impression Sunset. And through this painting did the term Impressionism come. So over here, I will just be marking out wherever I want the elements to be. Like if I want the sun here, I'll just mark it out here. Here, there's some buildings at the back. Just like that, very roughly. It doesn't need to be, made very accurately. Put this one here. Just like that. Okay. So for our initial sketch, this much is more than enough. Now what we can do is we can start by filling in the background. So if you look at this image, what color do you see the most everywhere? So if you look at it, at the very top, you might see a little bit of orange, and whereas when you see the bottom 1/3, you'll see a lot of blue over there. So even at the sky where you see the orange, there is a slight hint of blue. So over there we can start by adding blue in the background. So I'll take this blue. I'll take a little blue out because I want the blue to be relatively light. So I'll take this much blue and I'll just mix it over here. And I'll take a little bit of white. That should be enough. And I'll mix it in with the water. So now for this painting I will be using acrylics. But originally the painting done by Monet or the artists of that time, they were all done in oil paints. So when you compare oil and acrylics, the finishing is pretty different. Oil has a bit more of a smooth finish since they remain wet, whereas compared to acrylics, they tend to dry pretty quick. So you need to add quite a bit of water into it, or you will need to add a wash to the paper. So what do I mean by wash? Wash would mean is you add water to the paper first and then you paint over it while the paper is wet. So what this would do is it would keep the paint from drying quickly, and you can blend the paint as well. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking water and I'm just spreading it around the paper wherever I'm going to paint. So if you want to see if the water is spread evenly, is you can check the reflections. Wherever there isn't enough reflection of the water, you can add a little more water over there. Just like that. So this is even a watercolor technique. It's not limited to just acrylics. So you can use it for watercolors, for gouache, for poster, for acrylics. But for oil paints, we do not use water. We use either linseed oil or we use turpentine. That's a whole nother story. We'll get into that in another workshop. Now what I can do here is I can check whether I like this color. Okay. So this color looks pretty good. So I'll add this blue here. Now if you look at the paint, it is very soft. It doesn't have very harsh outlines after every brush stroke. And since we have water applied to the paper, it will create a sense of transparency, meaning that whatever drawing we have at the background, it will be visible. So you can keep it this much here, and we can take it down slightly. And make sure you paint over the drawing. We don't want to try going just around the borders, because then what will happen is when you paint, you'll have a bit of a problem trying to cover up that area with the other colors. So we'll keep it as loose as possible, as loose as the Impressionist artist did. So we can keep this here. Okay, that looks good for our first layer. So now we're working in layers. What do I mean by layers? By layers, I mean we'll add first one tone or one color to the base, and once that dries, or maybe even if it is still wet, we can add a different color to it right over the top. Now in this blue, I can add, I think, a little more blue because this area is a bit darker. I'll mix it in here. Now in this painting, we won't be able to get the colors as accurate as this artist did, because not only did he just use blue, red or green, he used varieties of blue, varieties of reds, varieties of yellows. And like I said in the previous workshops, that each blue has its own uniqueness to it, and each red also has its own uniqueness to it. So when you mix two unique colors, you get another unique color, which you cannot get with just these colors that I have here. So we're trying to get as close as possible to the actual painting. You can take this here. bring this down like that. Now see, I'm just trying to leave an impression of what was once in this frame. So these paintings, you can think of them as metaphors. So metaphors visualized. And normally when you use a metaphor, you would say, oh my god, that hurt so much, or you would say that bird flew fast like a plane. Now, in reality, it doesn't make sense, but when you use such phrases, you go like, oh, okay, that means that bird flew very fast. So same thing over here. We aren't going to paint the buildings in a very literal manner, but we're going to show that, oh, okay, you know what? These buildings were here and it gave off this very, very soft, very distant kind of feeling. That's what we're trying to achieve here right now. At the very top also, we can add a bit of this blue here above the sun. Now within these blues, we have a lot of yellows, we have a lot of reds, we have a lot of greens as well. So I'll wet this paint a little more because I do not want it to be too strong. And then I can add it here. If it is too strong, then what I can do is I can take another brush again with little water in it and then just wet this area again wherever I feel it's getting dry. Just wet the entire area again. And then I can paint over it. Now if you see, as soon as I press the brush down, it fades into the surrounding. And that's what we want right now. Whatever we are painting, it should fade into the background. It should be a distant memory. It should be an emotion. So I think I can darken this blue here. Maybe add a bit more to this. Again, very subtle, very quick, and very rough with my brush strokes. Now, rough doesn't mean you go wild with it. Rough in the sense that your brush strokes are very spontaneous. I'm not trying to outline anything. I'm not trying to make sure, okay, here's a line. I'll try to get it as accurate as possible. That's not my intention. My intention is to just capture whatever I see in that quick second that I glance at my reference. Now what I can do is I can take a tiny bit of red and I'll mix it here. Maybe a little more. Now this as well, we can lighten it up a bit. I'll put my white over here. Mix it in one corner. Now I feel that it's a little dull, it's not the color that I want, so I can go back and add a bit more red to it. I'll mix it with water. I'll dilute it a bit because I do not want the paint to be very strong or very overpowering. So I can just put a dot here and see first. Clean this brush a bit and take as little paint as I can. Be like that. Over here. And if you see, I'm just putting spots. I'm not doing anything yet because now I have more than enough paint that I need. So I'll clean my brush, take off whatever water I have on it, and then just spread it out. Since it's diluted in water, it will automatically lighten itself as I spread it. Now, there are very subtle hints of red in certain areas. So even if you don't see it at a certain place, there most likely is red. Over here we can add a bit. Again, I'm just taking whatever little color I have on my brush and I'm just spreading it around. Like that. Now what I can do is I can work on this top area again. So before I wet that area, what I'll do is I'll mix my color. So it's pretty light orange. I'll take a bit of yellow here. I'll take my red as well. I'll take my red, take my yellow, first get the type of orange that I need, and then I can add white to it. Then I can take the brush with water and just very gently spread it around. I don't want to be too rough with it, or else whatever I just painted below it will get wiped away. Now, normally it wouldn't get wiped away, but since we're using water here and keeping the paint wet, it creates a chance of that happening. Now at the top, I'll just add very roughly few strokes wherever I see orange. Now you must be thinking this is very bright. This is not the same orange that I see in the reference. That is true, but this orange still exists below this darker orange or this darker blue that is there. So we got to create layer by layer. Now what I can do is I can take my red, darken this orange, add this here in the top left, this corner as well. Again, it's very rough, very spontaneous brush strokes. Okay. Now I can darken this even more. Put it in this corner. If I find it turning too red, I'll take my yellow again and mix it. Okay, this looks like a very strong, a very stern red. There, now it's starting to fall into place. Again, very subtle, very, I wouldn't say random, but very quick with wherever I put it. So imagine yourself in this scene, the sun is setting, but when the sun sets, it happens very quick. Within 15-20 minutes, the sun is going to go. So before it goes, you're trying to capture all of that into this one painting. So that's what we're trying to do here. As quickly as we can, we're trying to capture wherever I see this color, and I'll put it down. And then I'll move on to the next color. And so I can leave that part to dry because I want some other colors on it, but I don't want it to blend in with this. So I'll let it dry, and then once it's dried, I can come back to this top area here, and then I can add the darker colors to it. Now we can work on the lower area. It has a bit of bluish green to it. I'll take, so I already have blue ready here, but I do not want it to be this light. I'll take a bit of white. Maybe I can take a lot more white since this green is pretty strong. Now remember, whatever colors you see over here will be at the bottom, and whatever colors you see at the bottom will be at the top as well, because light reflects off of objects. So if I have, say, a yellow light coming here, it will bounce off the wall and come over here as well. So keeping that in mind, we'll mix a bit of this blue also into this green. We want this to be slightly dull. We don't want it to be very vibrant as well. So I'll keep taking color little by little until I feel like I have the right temperature to the color. So I'll put a dot first to see. Okay, that looks good to me. Now I will wet this area. Now the dot I put, you probably couldn't see it, but now when I apply it, you'll see what color I have put. Now wherever I feel like I can apply this color, I'm going to put it there. Over here also, there's a very slight touch of it. That is still wet. I'm not going to touch that right now. Go like this. Now when I want more paint, I'll keep the brush flat. When I want less paint, I'll keep it vertical, because now if you see, there's a lot of paint over here, but there's very less paint at the tip. So when I want to apply a lot more paint, I can do that. When I want less paint, I can do that. So you can see the difference. So now that I'm coming a little higher, I'll put a little blob of paint, and then with the tip I will spread it around. So I have control over how much paint I'm applying. The bit of red coming to green, and then I'll be adding the other colors on top as well. Now here also there's a very slight hint of green. It's so subtle that even if you don't see it, it is okay. It is still there. Now, most of these artists back then, they had a lot of philosophy revolved around their paintings. So what they do is not only their philosophy, but their vision or their own perspective, they put and add to this. Now we can add this color over here as well. Very subtle. Okay, now I can darken this green also a bit more, so that I can add a bit of depth into it. So you can play with the transparency and opaqueness of the paint. So transparency would be where you have a lot more water so you can see the paper or the colors below, and the opaqueness would be where this color covers entirely of a certain area. This is a bit too strong, so you can use your finger to remove a bit of that color. Okay, now we can wait for this to dry. I can check up with this paint here. It's still a bit wet, but okay, we can work on that area now. So we can go back to the sky and we can add the darker tones. So now this technique, what I did just now is I applied whichever color I see the most in the areas I see them. So at the top I see a lot more orange, in the middle I see more blues, at the bottom I see more greens. So this technique is called blocking in. Blocking in is basically where you add whatever colors you see the most and fill that area up with that color. So it will be more like a mid-tone. Now if you have a middle tone, you can add lights to it and you can add darks to it. But if it's plain white, then you can just keep getting it darker and darker, which will make it a little more difficult. But when you add a middle tone like what I have right now, now if I want to darken a certain area, like maybe over here, I can darken it. If I want to lighten this area, I can add a bit of white and lighten it over here also. So it gives me a much wider perspective. It lets me see the entire painting rather than just parts of painting that I am focusing on. Okay, now we can move to the sky. I'll take, it's too much blue. I'll take my blue over here. Then I can take a tiny bit of red. I want it to be dark, but I don't want it to be too dark also. Okay, I think I'll remove a bit of water from this brush and in a very soft way I'll apply water over here wherever I want to paint. It doesn't have to be the entire painting again and again. And if there is too much water, very gently you can just dab it off with your paper towel. Because what can happen is if you put too much pressure, then you might just clean whatever paint you have down there. I'll add this here. I'll add this color. This one as well. Drag this a bit to the right. This one also. Clean my brush, take out whatever paint I have, and quickly start spreading it. I can come back to this color, pick it up a bit, and start adding it very faintly. That is too strong, so I can wipe it off a bit with my finger. Here also it's too strong. Wipe it off a bit with my finger. Maybe a bit here also. That part is okay. over here, and if you see, I started picking up the orange color that is there. I don't want that, so I'll come back to this color here and I'll start placing it down again. So I'll keep going back and forth again and again to it. So when you add different layers, you add more depth to it, more depth to your painting. I can bring this orange color down also, so that you can show that the orange sky is leaking into the bluish background. Now I can think about which color do I want to add, which color do I, or which area of the painting I want to make darker. So I think this area here, it's become too bluish in color. I can add a bit of green to it. So I'll take this blue and mix it up with this green. Maybe take a little more green, a little more blue also. I think this would be a nice color. Let's see. My paint wasn't mixed properly. I think take a bit more blue. Make sure your paint or your paintbrush has just one color. We don't want 2-3 colors onto this. I'll add a bit of water because I don't want this color to be too strong or too solid. I want it to be blending into everything. Like that. So I'll place the color wherever I see it the darkest, and then I can start spreading it from there. Over here, I don't want it to be seen too much. So you can start painting with your finger as well. There you go. You can add or subtract from your painting. Then I can lighten this up a bit. That's a bit too much. So I'll clean my brush. Mix it again with this. I can start adding the reflections. Need to make this a bit more bluish. That is again too strong. Mix it in with this, the color we previously had. Make sure you mix it properly. Again, if you feel that your lines are coming too straight, then you can add a bit of water. We can keep it like that. Now it is impossible to copy this painting stroke by stroke because of how spontaneous these strokes were. But what we can do is best match it as much as you can, or we can try to get an impression of this impressionistic painting. If you feel that there's too much water in certain areas, you can always take it off. I had this color here, right? I can add a few waves like this also. Then I can start making this a little bit greener. Now over here, okay, whatever extra water I had, I spread that out. Since it's wet, the paint won't dry relatively quick, so I can just put these colors down here. Clean my brush. Make sure I remove the water as much as I can. And then I'll spread this paint. Now remember, if your brush is too dry, it will lift up whatever paint you've put down or whatever water is there on the paper. So keeping that in mind, you would like to adjust the amount of pressure or the angle of your brush. Like that. Okay. Maybe I can take a bit of this blue, mix it in with this, and just give it a very faint structure to it so that we can see some separation from the background and the foreground. Although we want to make it subtle, we don't want to blend it so much so that it just looks like one piece and you can't tell whether there's a background, whether there's a foreground, or whether these are buildings or maybe something else also. Very subtle, very soft. Now it's looking like, buildings in the back. We don't want it too strong, so I'll just soften this up with my finger. Like that. Okay, now we can start adding in the darker colors. Now we can do the reflection. So before I do the reflection, I want to see if I'm happy with the sky. I think I can make it just a little bit darker. I dried my brush after putting water down, and whatever extra water is here, I'm going to remove it and then add this. Like that. And now don't worry about the sun, since we'll be adding a very solid color to it. We won't be adding any water for the sun. I'll mix my orange. I'll take a bit of red here, a little bit of yellow, mix it well. I think I can make this a little more red. Again, this also I'm not gonna try to make it a proper circle. I can make one side with a bit of a stiff or a proper outline, and the other side can be a little bit wavy. That will add to the atmosphere, or it will create more of a vibe to the painting. Again, we're not trying to create realism, we're trying to create an impression of what realism is. The same paint again here. I'll take a tiny bit of water, don't need too much. Now for this, the paper is still kind of wet, so I can again add layers to this. Now the boat is here. As the orange starts fading away, I'll use even less pressure now, so that there's less paint falling onto these areas. Like that. Then take maybe a little bit more red, not too much, not too little also. Now this seems to be a very strong sunset. I can thicken this paint a bit. Maybe here. Okay, that's fine. Like that. Clean this brush. Now I can add the greens at the bottom. I'll take my green, put it here, take a bit of blue as well. I'm not going to use pure green. Whatever colors I use, I'm not going to use it as it is. I'll always mix some color or the other into it. Now when we're painting this, we're going to go from light to dark, not dark to light. Because if you look at this reference, you can see the darkest strokes are at the very top, or they are the most visible, whereas the lighter strokes, they are hidden behind the darker ones. That means this painting is done from light to dark, or from middle to dark. Now I can add white to this. Seems like a good color. And then I can start creating these brush strokes here. Okay, now I can darken this one a little bit more, and then add these as well. Okay, and then I can now leave this to dry, and I can work on this area here. I'll take blue, and I'll mix a bit of this color, or I can mix this color itself into the blue. Add a bit of white to it. That's too much. So whenever you mix any color, always take little by little first, and then keep adding more and more color as you need. Maybe a little more bluish. Now you can lighten this color as well. Clean the brush. and spread. You can add a bit of this color at the bottom also. It's become a little light. Okay. Now for the final part, I'll mix this green with blue. Maybe a little more green. I can add a few strokes over here just to create that differentiation between the foreground and the background. Add a tiny bit of white here. I can have a little bit of this middle tone in places that I feel are too empty or too bright. Okay, and then we can do, I think we'll finish the sky. If you look at the reference over here at the top left, we have a few white lines. So I'll take this white, remove whatever water I have first. Over here, and maybe take a bit more green. It's not going to be pure white. Yeah, very gentle strokes. See, we had put a middle tone down, and now we are starting to add the lighter colors to it. Can add some in between here as well. mix some white into this. Add some very roughly put yellow strokes down. Can give the sun a slight outline. Maybe over here also. Very subtle. Put some of this yellow in other places as well. Very slight. I don't want it too strong also. I'll clean this brush. Take a bit of white. There's too much water in my brush. I'll remove a bit. Take a bit more white. This white, I don't want it to be pure white. A little bit of some color you can add to it. Again, try to maintain control over the amount of pressure you add in these areas. Maybe a little bit in between the reflection. Very tiny bit in this areas. Okay, now we can do the boat. So for the boat, I'm going to mix blue and green. Just blue and green. So I want it dark. Okay, so we have a question saying why not black? So the reason why we won't be adding black is because when we add black, the freshness or the brightness of the color, it can dull away. So in order to maintain, so if you look at this image, it isn't flat black. There is some light bouncing off of it, so there is some brightness to it. And when we add black, that brightness doesn't come properly. So it is dark, but it's not black. It is not invisible. There is some sort of depth to it. Which is why over here, now even when I add this blue and green here, it's going to look as good as black. But it won't be black. It will give that illusion, that darkness will feel like it is black. So I'll draw the boat here. this. Put over here for the reflection. Now if you see, I added a bit more blue to this, and you'll have two different tones over here below the boat. Now if we want with this color only, we can. Okay, so here's also one thing that we can do. I'll have my tissue ready. I'll put a stroke here and pick it up. This stroke here also and pick it up. Now what this will do is it will give that darkness, but it won't be very dark also. Over here, add two strokes and lift it, so that way we don't have to worry about adding more water to it. Plus it just makes our work much easier. Down here, a bit in the middle, it's a little too empty. Make sure you keep turning your paper or your tissue, because if you pick this part up and with the same area you try to lighten up this area here, then this paint will fall over here. You might lift this paint up, but you'll be putting this paint in this area, and we do not want that to happen. Pick that up, pick that up. Okay, now we can see, before we take off the tape, do we want any other changes to be made? Do we feel like we could darken something, or maybe lighten some area? Maybe over here we can, let me just put a dot first to see. Okay, so one thing I like to do before putting or before painting certain areas is that I'll just put a very tiny dot of paint onto my canvas or onto my paper, so that I can see whether it's giving me the color that I want, or it's gonna mess up my painting if I just immediately go over that area. Okay, I think that should be good. Okay, now what we can do is we can start taking off the tape. Now when we take off the tape, you'd want to remove it at a 90-degree angle, so this way, and be very gentle with it. We don't want to tear the paper. If you have certain areas where the paint has leaked through, that is okay. It's something that everyone goes through. You also be very gentle with it, like that. I'm going part by part. I'm not gonna just rip the entire tape out. clear my table a bit. And then last but not least, this area here. And there you go, perfect. So there you go, guys. This is the final work, or the finished work for our Impressionism bookmark. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this workshop. Every day we have our workshops at 12:30 and at 5:30, where we come up with new workshops to try and bring art to everyone and bring everyone to art as well. So for more information about what we do, you can have a look at our website or download our Rooftop app. Thank you, everyone.